recently, but he decided to stay in the Senate because he thought he could solve problems there. In fact, he was part of the gang of 6, 3 Republicans and 3 Democratic senators, which actually worked really hard in a bipartisan way and almost successfully solved our entire deficit problem. But it got caught up to a lot of other issues that didn't involve the 6 people there. He's been a champion for the federal employees, he's been a champion for the military, and he's certainly been a champion for veterans, and he's been a great advocate for Virginia. And our reputation as a great state in terms of attracting technology in business is in part due to your leadership as governor and also your representation as a senator. He's certainly worked on very hard in terms of focusing on private sector innovation. He was one of the leaders in terms of focusing on crowdfunding and getting startups funded. He's been willing to talk about things like entitlement reform, and he stood up in many ways for business, which is a good thing. It's not always the appropriate thing within his party. So I am very glad that you're here just as our senator, but also as a former tech executive, and we are certainly proud to have you come here, and we're very glad. We look forward to hearing you speak with us. So please welcome Senator Mark Miller.
Thanks for the opportunity to be here at CEA, see so many friends. Jay, always great to see you. And the opportunity to kind of share some thoughts, but more importantly, in the town hall meeting. So I'm ready to hear from you on areas of interest or concern. Maybe I'm still looking around to find that 8% of people who think we're doing a good job in Congress. I don't know if at any of our town hall meetings, because I want to ask that 8% what that crazy thinking. It is interesting being a tech guy for 20 years and now been in politics for 9 years in elective office. I am, as Gary mentioned, for some of you who are young enough, I actually was the co-founder of Nextel, so I also am the only politician who says, even when I'm speaking, leave your cell phones on. They don't bother me at all. And then I was a venture capitalist, and very much understand the challenges we face in a global environment that more and more is going to be a challenge between a competition, localities, states, countries, between access to capital and talent. It's kind of its core that those are going to be the drivers of modern economy. On the capital standpoint, I still think with all the challenges we have in America, America still, because of our fluid capital markets, ranks head and shoulders above most other nations in terms of access to capital. But in the aftermath of the financial crisis, and me having spent years as a VC, a lot of the traditional funding sources for capital have changed. I mean, a lot of the angel networks have dried up. A lot of the VCs have gotten larger and larger. Gary made mention of one of the things that I think could be extraordinarily disruptive to capital access will be crowdfunding. Something that was, you can maybe one of the few groups around that actually know we passed something called the Jobs Act 3 years ago now. It's almost been 4 years. And that's the good news is. The bad news is that it's still 4 years later, we still haven't got the SEC to give out all the final regulations so that this tool, to use the internet to raise equity capital, is going to become a full disruptive tool in capitalism. I think there will be mistakes made. One of the challenges I continue to make to the SEC is, there will be people who get it wrong on crowdfunding. We've got to take that risk. That unlike past areas where capital fundraising was mismatched in terms of the old boiler room techniques and stuff, one of the things about the internet is there will be an ability to self-police some of the platforms that may not be getting it right in a way that is really, again, profoundly different. So access to capital, terribly important. Access to talent, equally important. Actually, been partners with Moran, not our own Jim Moran, but Jerry Moran, the Republican senator from Kansas for the last 4 years, on something called the Startup Act, which has been about the issue of, one, making it easier for startups to do a little better in terms of tax treatment, but equally important is to that question of access to talent. Could you imagine a worse business policy and growth policy for the United States than the current immigration laws we have, where we train at our world's best and brightest, and somebody gets that PhD in engineering at Virginia Tech, and he or she does not have to go back to Brazil or Denmark or India anymore. They simply have to go across the border to Canada, because Canada, the UK, and Australia have all changed their high skill immigration reform so that they get the folks that we now train. And with tech companies having global footprints, that is crazy. So I strongly support high skill immigration reform. I strongly support comprehensive immigration reform. I thought we were getting close when we passed the bill in the Senate. Frankly, I actually wish we would have gotten more votes than the 69 votes or 68 votes we got. Should have had mid-70s, and while I'm disappointed the House hasn't acted yet, maybe it will come back again after the primary season. So, but if there was ever a piece of legislation that is good in terms of reflective of who we are as Americans, good in terms of meeting the criteria of increasing border security, decreasing the debt, recognizing basic fairness around the dreamers, and actually lowers our deficit, that's what comprehensive immigration reform does, and it's long overdue. We talked a little bit on the way coming in about patent reform. This is an issue that frankly, Gary said, Warren, you need to have a higher profile. And as somebody who has had companies that I have had huge investment in absolutely destroyed by patent trolls, I feel the pain. I have felt the pain, and we have taken a system around intellectual property protection that was based in a good idea, based in a way, in many ways, when it used to be kind of, we've had the farm and tech battles forever, but also it used to be kind of small guys versus big guys. That's totally transformed. Where now we have the intellectual property buildup as arsenals of litigation rather than as tools of innovation makes no sense. And the patent reform that we had 4 years ago, didn't do enough. So again, the House version, I think, on patent reform has gone farther than what Senator Leahy's going. I was saying in front of you, you're going to hear my voice much louder on this issue, and I think what we have is a much more comprehensive recognition that patent reform has to be part of an innovation strategy. What drove this home to me more than even Gary's comments here was there is a Group J over in Boston of kind of high-tech startup folks that wanted. But it really struck me here were 150 plus high-tech entrepreneurs, many of them tiny startups, and one of their top issues was patent reform. Since in the past, the argument would be, no, we need that patent protection to protect their rights. No, they are getting abused by folks who are using this as a tool for economic enrichment, none in terms of innovation. Single driving issue, though, outside kind of the tech sphere and the innovation sphere and the growth sphere, that drives me and keeps me pounding away. And Gary again made a brief comment on this, and one that I think would, if we get right, would do more for job growth, would do more for economic growth than any single initiative or any single programmatic effort of the federal government, and that is getting our country's balance sheet. I've become a bit obsessed about this. To the point during the days of the beginning of the sixth period, other senators would walk the other direction rather than have me grab them by their lapels. And with the budget deal that we got in the fall, which thank goodness included at least another government shutdown. I mean, think about what did people in the rest of the world think when we did the shutdown? We were furloughing American Nobel Prize winning physicists. What message were we sending out? But we kind of went through this high five, we've avoided a shutdown. We're going to have a budget for 2 years. That was kind of basically prerequisites for our job, which we had a budget every year. But candidly, that was good that we avoided a crisis for 2 years. The bad news is that budget deal did not do anything to take on the real sacred cows in both political parties in topic reform and tax reform. And to give you a little bit of indigestion, we are sitting on $17 trillion of debt. It goes up $3 billion a night. And particularly those of you who are younger in this room, we don't get it fixed, it's going to be your problem. And right now, we're sitting at a time, I know folks say, well, we don't like taxes, we want to change entitlements, but for every 1% increase in interest rates, just with the debt we have right now, we add $120 billion a year of debt service, mandatory tax, in effect, that trumps any other spending area. That is the equivalent of 2 new departments of Homeland Security each year being added to government spending, just if interest rates go up a point. And let me assure you, with the kind of the loose money policies of the Fed, at some point that's going to have to come back, and interest rates are probably going to go up more than 100 basis points. So we are going to need a policies that, and I'm not saying what we did with Gang of Six, which was Simpson Bowles, was the perfect template. There may be better. I'm wide open for better. But this is not going to get solved until we do entitlement reform, and until we find a tax code that is simpler, cleaner, more pro-growth, and also that generates additional revenues. The truth of the matter is, over the last 75 years, and I won't go on too long, I want to make sure I get to questions. Over the last 75 years, though, our country's run an annual deficit about 70 in the 75 years. So there's plenty of blame to go around Democrat and Republican alike. The only time we've had a budget balance in those last 75 years has been when spending and revenues have been between 19.5% and 21% of our GDP, part of our economy. Right now, and these numbers are a little old, so they may have fluctuated a half point or so. Spending is about 23, 24%. Revenue is about 17, 18%. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out if the only time you balances your budget is when we've been in the middle of that, and even with entitlement reform, is going to still, we're going to have an aging population, you're going to have to do both sides. And again, I've been proud to be an equal opportunity defender on this. I've had even groups like the AARP run ads against me. But I believe we ought to protect Social Security and Medicare, but there is nothing that will protect Social Security and Medicare when we have a system right now that when I was a kid, there were 16 people working for every one person in retirement. And today, there are 3 people working for every one person in retirement. Not anybody's fault, but because the docs are letting us live longer, it means the math doesn't work anymore. There's nothing to me progressive about a notion that says me that's been able to do well shouldn't have to pay a little bit more on their Medicare when we have a country right now where poverty rates are 8% amongst seniors and 23% amongst children. Because here is the business plan for America if we don't get this taken off. Right now, for every dollar that you send Uncle Sam, only 16 cents goes to everything that in English is called, or in Washington speak, is called domestic discretionary, which in English means everything that is spent on early childhood, environment, education, infrastructure, research. The House plan would take that 16% to 4% over about 12 to 15 years. Now, I could give a hoot whether you're Democrat or Republican, but tell me, would you, as folks who work at CEA, deal with innovators, would you, as an entrepreneur, invest in any business that spent less than 5% of its revenues training and equipping its workforce, investing in plant and equipment, which for a nation is infrastructure, and in a global economy staying ahead of the competition, which is research and development? That is just a fundamentally bad business plan. So, we have to get that resolved. Whether it's deficit reduction, entitlement reform, an innovation and growth strategy, which has to be, you can't cut weight your way or tax your way only. You got to have a growth strategy, and that comes back to, again, access to capital, access to talent, continuing to spur innovative, disruptive technologies. And the good news is that there's a lot more of us on the Hill in both political parties who want to do the right thing than I think the press portrays. I was not a neophyte coming to Capitol Hill. I worked on Capitol Hill as a kid when I was in college and coming to GW. But even I was a little surprised when I got there after being governor, how much the pressure was to push everybody in to make sure we should reforms. And the thing that we need to do, as Virginians and Americans, and even those of you who are unlucky enough to live across the river, pay out in taxes, is we got to make it safe for people to go country first. And so the request I make for you before you kind of get into the question and answer periods, don't vote for anybody who signs one of these stupid pledges, one of the pledges that never raise taxes or never touch Social Security. You know, both sides use it. You know, be willing to tune down both Fox and MSNBC occasionally, because neither one will tell you the whole truth. And occasionally, I think we have to get out of our own personal political foxholes. You know, some of the biggest political courage I've seen in the 5 years I've been in the Senate has been my friend Saxby Chambliss from Georgia, who's a hardcore conservative Republican who was willing to say in Georgia, you know what, we need more revenues if we're going to get this fixed. Or Dick Durbin in Illinois, who was willing to say to labor and seniors, very progressive, but to say there's nothing progressive about a Social Security and Medicare system that's going to go bankrupt. So we sometimes, you know, if you're a Republican in this room, go support a Democrat who's willing to do entitlements. If you're a Democrat, support a Republican who's willing to do revenues. Until we can make it safe for people to kind of do the right thing, I think we're going to end up with less creative destruction and more political rhetoric. And at a time when America doesn't have the quantitative and qualitative lead that we had maybe 20 years ago around the rest of the world, in a world that has been flattened, you know, we have to keep our act together. So I really very much appreciate the chance to be here. I'm going to turn this into a long spiel from me into a response to you. So Gary, thanks for the chance to be here. Thanks for all of you who are here from other, from not only CEA, but other groups as well around the community. And it's your town hall, so fire away with questions. Thanks, everybody.
Senior Vice President of Government Affairs will have the first question. How appropriate
is this a little bit of a setup?
Senator, we're so thrilled to have you here, and thank you for all you do for the innovation industry. We greatly appreciate it. When you walk through CES this year, you notice that pretty much every product now relies on wireless spectrum. What can we do to make sure there's enough wireless spectrum to support the next generation of innovation?
Great setup questions. I got rich off spectrum, so you know. That's PC to say, especially you know, but and in fact, as America's behind, when you go to Korea, when you go to Europe, they've done a much better job at getting more spectrum. Yeah, and let me tell you the challenges. I mean, I've had a bill for a couple of years that said we ought to at least do a spectrum inventory. Because again, most of the spectrum that we have right now is in the government's hands. And we couldn't even get, Olympia Snow and I had this bill, and I will again put forward, there's not any major legislation I'm working on that I don't have a Republican party. And I believe that a lot because I don't think the public trusts either political party enough to give them a blank check. And if it's bipartisan in a lot of ways, I think it says to people who don't follow stuff, well, maybe that's in the country's interest. So again, just from how you get to yes, you got to start bipartisan. But Olympia Snow and I had this bill that said, let's at least do an inventory. Because of some, you know, some legitimate and some maybe not fully legitimate concerns from the defense community, and I'm on the Intel committee now as well, from the NIC, we've not been able to do the inventory. So where can we make progress? One, on the incentive auctions that were passed last couple of years to try to get some more broadcasters to incent to move off that spectrum and get some money back. I know there's been some times, you know, challenges between our folks in the tech industry and the broadcast community. I don't know if you're saying that lightly, you know, eyebrows going up and down on that, but you know, but I think there's a win-win here for broadcasters to migrate and for them to get a piece of the proceeds. Incentive auctions out there. We've got other auctions that are incentive auctions out there where we've got to do some spectrum clearing to move existing operators into other spectrum, and it shouldn't, the FCC shouldn't be taking as long as it is taking. So that would be one area, and I think Tom Wheeler and I go back a long ways. He's in the FCC chair. You know, I intend pushing to move those incentive auctions along. Point one. Point two, and I got crosswise a little bit with, again, the chairman of the Commerce Committee, which I was on until recently, on the public safety spectrum. You know, I absolutely believe it's an embarrassment in our country 10 years after 9/11 where first responders don't have a common system to use that can sort of cops can talk to firefighters, can talk to EMTs. But I also know that as long as you build a public safety only network, with that kind of equipment, you're gonna have $4,000 radios as opposed to $200 radios. And somebody said there ought to be a contest that goes around and does photos of how many times first responders are seen actually talking on their emergency radio versus their cell phone, even in their line of business. So, I hope and still believe there may be an opportunity, because we gave them a lot of good spectrum, but one of the things I advocate, I think, since never underestimate the ability of engineers to overbuild a system, I believe we can go back to public safety with some of their underutilized spectrum and get some of that back. I think and that's a kind of a current play. And I think ultimately we have to, on the balance of the federal government spectrum, we need to find ways to incent agencies where they can actually keep some of the revenues that come out of these auctions, even within their department. Because otherwise, you will not have the disruption we need and the incentives. There will always be some reason given why we can't get more spectrum. And I would just couple that as well with something that says this, because spectrum is also going to be critical in that last mile of broadband delivery. When I was governor, I was really proud of the fact that we put the biggest rural broadband deployment in the whole country along the southern part of Virginia, because we had taken our tobacco money and not used it to plug a budget hole, but to basically create a venture fund for that region of the state. And Mid-Atlantic Broadband did a great job on putting broadband out. And we've got a lot of schools and other things in South Side. But you get a mile away from the school, you don't have broadband. And broadband is not going to guarantee a community success, but the absence of broadband is going to virtually destroy an economic future for most communities. And in a world where you should be able to choose where you want to live, you shouldn't have to move to find a quality job. And we've got to have that broadband. Part of that broadband will be last mile wireless. Long answer, I apologize. Others?
Good morning, I'm Allison Homer from CEA. You spoke a little bit about the antipathy in the current political climate, and I have to, admire people who fight through that. And I'm just wondering, it seems like the climate would dissuade people from wanting to get into politics, even if they believe strongly in the ideals of being service. Where do you think the next generation of leaders is going to come from?
Allison, right? You ask, I think, maybe the most profound question in terms of what I worry about for our country. Because we've had, especially in Virginia, financial year, electoral year. I know most folks are like, let me turn it off. And the problem with that is the voices on the extreme, they love it when the sensible center turns off. That simply increases their influence. And I look around. I've been blessed to have done pretty well before I went into this job. I also get to be, I'm the only member of the Senate that can see the Capitol from my own house. Sort of paper comment somewhere. Most recently, one of my good friends in South Montana, he slept 11 hours each way. And last year, 2 years ago, when I was after the election, he did 500 fundraisers. And I looked at the list of people, but I got a lot of my friends in both parties, the Republican Party, who are throwing in the towel this year. My friend Saxby is not doing it. They've done it too long, tried too hard. We need to make money. I am worried. Because if good people that aren't into kind of getting to yes get hired, there's no predestination. America's going to be the same economic, attractive, free enterprise country in the 21st century, maintaining all of its leads that we had in the 20th century. You know, there's a billion people in India, a billion people in China, and a billion people in South America who all want their piece of pie. And again, I believe innovation and economic growth comes from the private sector. What I also say is the first person in my family to graduate from college, if I hadn't gone to a good public school or hadn't been a student loan program, I'm not sure I would have gotten through. And I sure as heck don't know, can't remember one of the things that worries me now. You know, I came out with 15 grand worth of debt. My first two businesses failed miserably before I got into cellular, and the third business, you know, I have the story of living out of my car and all this stuff, sleeping on my friends' couches. I'm not sure I would have had the courage to take 3 shots if I'd come out with 100 grand in student debt. You know, we're talking about kind of crisis to come. We're $1 trillion of student debt right now, we're in credit card debt. You know, we need a fundamental rethinking of how we fund and look at higher education. And part of that is college cost component. Part of that is also because direct aid from state and federales has dropped precipitously in higher education. So how do we keep good people in? We got to find a way that the country can show that we who get hired can actually get stuff done. That's why I think sometimes, you know, I'm going to sound like a broken record about the budget issue, because ultimately a lot flows from your budget. Your country's priorities are defined by your budget. And yesterday I had Alzheimer's on one time, then I had pediatric cancer, and before that, pediatric brain injuries. They all wanted more money. You know, look at these killed kids who've got these awful diseases. And I said, yeah, I support that, but I can't promise you I'm going to take it for Alzheimer's to give to pediatric cancer in a world where NIH budget is shrinking. So we got to get this fixed. And if we can, the incremental amount we need to do is so small, and the upside of showing America can actually take on a problem and get it done would be so powerful. I'm still not giving you the answer of what's going to make somebody step up and do this. I think one of the most important things we can do is show is that we're actually getting stuff done again. It worries. Your question worries me as much as anything that is involved in public service, because most of my friends, particularly my friends in business, many of them have been blessed to do really well. They no more would do this. They think I'm crazy. And maybe there are times I scratch my head too. Maybe and just look. And if anything, we've made it worse in the last few years. I don't know how many of you follow the political stuff I went to. There's this thing called Citizens United, a Supreme Court case that basically said, okay, not only do we have a screwy campaign finance system, but on top of that, we've got unlimited money be dropped in on your head without even any indication of where it came from. So it is a challenge. And somebody who has been bipartisan and doesn't check every box on Democratic orthodoxy. I've made a lot of folks on the Democratic Party upset with me. I didn't want to be the beta test in 2014 of whether you can do this in a way that's bipartisan focused. But I'm going to find out.
For those of you that don't know, there is an election coming up.
This is not an election function, this is a Senate function.
But just factually, there is an opponent to the senator, and he is the former chairman of the Republican Party.
Yeah, he's got a couple of other folks running against him too, so it's something
Well,
to
but
engage with.
he's most likely the person running against him. But this is not an election event. But this is about the substance of being a U.S. senator. Feel free, ask anything you want. Oh, yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Come on up to the microphone, please.
Hi, Kristen Maxwell with CEA. I heard you on Wait, Don't Tell Me last week. And from that, I was cool. You talked about believers, you talked about the Tea Party, you talked about going out of your car. But from that, I thought that you'd like to have a good time. You don't care so much about being PC, which you already touched on. But what I wanted to hear more about, you started to touch on living in a car and having a startup that failed, and then you went somewhere else. So I was curious about hearing more.
Okay, thanks for asking.
Yeah.
I'm the first person in my family to graduate from college, and went off to law school at Harvard, and decided after law school that I would come to politics. So got a job at the DNC for $18,000 a year, and all my law school classmates were making double that at big fancy firms. Did it for about a year and a half, and I thought, if I ever wanted to do politics, I'd be interested in politics anyway. Because I had no money, I did business. And I thought, it would be nice to have some finances so that you don't put yourself. I'd seen people where I thought that they had maybe made compromises to try to get contributions, or people put their families in huge amounts of debt by losing a race. Up in Connecticut, came out with $400,000 in debt, I think, after a campaign. I kept thinking, oh my God, how would you ever dig yourself out of it? So I said, all right, I'm going to go be a business guy. And took my life savings, $5,000, and invested in a little energy startup company. And 6 weeks, the company got totally broke. And did a real estate venture for 6 months, failed at that. And whenever I do graduation speeches, I talk about the fact that I failed at everything I've ever tried, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with failure. In fact, I think we as a society promote success so much that people don't take enough risks. And this third, so I'm living out of my car, sleeping on my friends' couches, or all fancy law firms. There was this third opportunity came up in cell phones, and it was brand new. The SEC was a license, and I said, this makes sense. All my law school classmates, I said this on the show, I said, I went to them and they all said to a person, Warner, you are so crazy. Go get a real job. Who's going on a cell phone? They're still billing. 6-minute increments as lawyers, so I became a client. So I started in the industry and helped as there was this kind of wild west. The FCC was giving out these licenses, and it was a crazy process where there was disruption, there was opportunity, because they set up a process where they were going to do a competitive review for these licenses the way they would do on radio stations, and that kind of all broke apart and turned into a lottery, and so people were buying and selling pieces of these licenses, and I ended up being the broker. And rolled some of those together, made a little dough. Somebody came to me, a lawyer in Washington, said, here's some spectrum right next to cellular. Why don't we put it all together? It was all push-to-talk radio, and create a network that looks and smells like cellular. It's being valued at 1/10 or 1/100th, I think, at that point. And we did that. And then I raised some other resources and started a venture capital fund. The first 5 years, I had 5 partners. We never had a legal document between us, and we invested only our own money. And we had 26 deals, 22 of which were between triples and home runs. We had 190% annualized IRR for about 8 years running of actual cash on cash. That's so we had a great run. And we brought in other folks and raised outside capital. So it taught me, that you got to be willing to be disruptive. You got to be willing to try. You got to be willing to fail. And it was the most exciting time of my life. Thanks for watching.
Sure.
Yes, ma'am.
Chairman Facette.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jay.
Thank you.
Senator Warner, first let me thank you, because I think we're all pretty excited and happy that you're there representing us, and have that reputation of being a fair-minded person, so that you are the kind of person that's going to be able to help solve some of these big problems. I remember years ago when you were governor, we were very helpful to Arlington in saving DARPA when the BRAC losses hit us harder than any community in the United States, with about 17,000 jobs. The question, I'm going to follow up on the question the one woman asked over here. When I keep thinking about the dysfunction at the national level, I come back to process and redistricting. And I would love to know your thoughts on the importance of fixing redistricting as almost a prerequisite to getting to a better place.
Yes. Computerized redistricting could be the death knell of democracy. Because it's not just the congressional level, it's also at the our state legislative level. If you draw these districts that are safe for incumbents, it moves the election to the primary. Most folks don't show up and vote in a primary. And back to your question earlier, more and more people get turned out. That means the universe of people who vote to determine who goes to the the Congress or the State House, it gets smaller and smaller. And if they get more extreme and more extreme, they turn more and more people off. So it becomes becomes a machine that feeds upon itself. So I absolutely support independent redistricting tactics. I should try to support it as a governor. I got no one. And there's an effort now in the state legislature to try to move this on. Frankly, a lot of the elected officials don't want it to happen because the current system protects incumbents. But we got to keep pushing it. I worry, though, on things like campaign finance and computerized redistricting. I believe still only a two-term governor. I tried to promote a two-term governor, not for me, but for future guys or gals. And which I think we're the last state in the country that one term. But I don't know how we make these issues attractive enough to really want to get people to be motivated to make this one of the driving issue. But I understand. And if you look at the states, Iowa has got, for example, has had for 20 odd years a independent redistricting commission. The legislature switches back and forth. The congressional district delegation switches back and forth. Virginia's kind of a swing state at this point. Blue or red or purple, these color coded, some of the homeland security stuff, But we're probably not. We're probably slightly more Republican still, but we're not 8-3 Republican, which is the makeup of our congressional delegation. Because of redistricting, and I think the House delegates right now, which is 68, 60 something like that, mid to high 60s. I don't think that's truly reflective of the makeup of the state. So I'm all in, and if we got it better, I'm wide open for other ideas on how we push this. A couple more questions, yeah. Yes, ma'am. Right, why don't you go stand in, we'll do them kind of bing, so you want to go stand in line?
Good morning, Senator. Grant Seif of TI. Gary, thanks for the invitation, of course. You did better than I did starting out in the Senate. I started at $16,000, so we're not trying to gain, so you all did much better.
That was much longer ago.
That was GNC, and I actually started as a mail guy for Abe Rimkoff at like $2 an hour. So.
Front desk for me. But anyway, thank you for taking the risk to serve public service. I think your story is great. Certainly, you've served and been a great example for many of us and the up-and-comers. But I would also thank you for your service on commerce. You've been a great voice for us, a great champion for many of our issues.
I frankly wish we would have gotten more done.
I certainly understand that. So I think only 2 markups in the last 3, 4 years, right? So not much happened there. So I'd like to thank you for the support on the RUS funding and the farm bill. That was critical and really.
Can I just take this? This is like a little tiny program where we're basically on broadband deployment where we were allowing folks to overbuild in areas that didn't have, had some level of service. We said we it's supposed to be for deployment of rural broadband. Maybe we ought to build where the people were underserved. So thanks for
perfect. And exactly. And the transparency there is great for the future of the internet and connecting these people. I would urge you to continue to support or push ITA and TTIP. So for all of us and all of the companies we represent, growth in those international markets is significant. And then you'll probably want to take your time off for this, but if you just talk about just transportation, traffic in Virginia, that's a big deal. And so we all, whether it's commuting to work, but we all have teleworking policies, but it's going to your kid's ball game on the weekend.
Thank you for your question. One, I'm going to say almost unequivocally. Back when I was governor, there was less traffic. and listen, we got our state finances fixed. We came in, we had a big deficit, $3 billion deficit, turned it over to the next side with $1 billion surplus, made a large investment in education, and all this. We didn't fix traffic to the extent we needed to. We cleaned up VDOT, but I tried. I still have the scars from the transportation referendum of 2002, where, and there was more, feel my frustration with this, since some of my friends in Arlington, not Jay, but some of my friends in Arlington were ones who helped keep 6 of us. there was more money for mass transit in terms of the formula split in that transportation reform. It was again, half penny sales tax increase. And we had this kind of interesting combination between the no tax crowd and the environmental crowd. And the thing that made me crazy was just, I strongly support the environment, but the notion that people sitting in traffic and sitting on clogged 2-lane roads that are going to at some point be moved to 4-lane and that have been on the books to move for 4-lane is somehow going to destroy the environment. It was a frustration. So where do we go from here? Want the good news or the bad news?
We know about the bad news, so.
Let me give you even a little more. The good news. The bad news is the government, I don't give them credit for this, and the legislature wouldn't have been exactly the plan. The state stepped up pretty dramatically 2 years ago. That's good. Bad, highway trust fund is bankrupt. We have a revenue source that funds this stuff. That, nobody likes high gas tax, I don't like high gas tax, but it's a declining source of revenue as we become more fuel efficient. So we need a new permanent funding source for transportation infrastructure. And there's not been a lot, even in Simpson Bowles, there's not been a lot of really creative ideas. One idea that I don't want to overplay, but it is a tool that we should have in the toolbox. And it is the only way, for example, that we're getting rid of the guns, is to try to leverage private capital, is to have an infrastructure financing authority of some kind that will allow long-term private capital to go in with some kind of guarantee on the back end so that you can really bring your rates down. That will be parts of these projects. It is a common sense, pro-business. We have pension funds around America that are investing in Europe and Australia and elsewhere because we don't have this tool here. We've got a modified version called TIFIA that's helping on Vail to Dulles. But this ought to be for not just road and traffic, but it ought to be for ports, it ought to be for rail, it ought to be for water projects, it ought to be for electric transmission. Not generation, because that gets you too much on the other mode way. And interesting thing is, I actually got a bill on this. And none of you ever heard of it. It's called the Bridge Act. It deals with infrastructure financing authority. I got 5 Republicans and 5 Democrats. When you start with 5 and 5, that's pretty good. I think the day we had the press conference was one of the many bad days on Obamacare. So that got all the news, and I'll be happy to comment on Obamacare too. But that would be one of the tools. It's not a full solution set. Sure. And if you put private capital will want to get paid back at some point, so it's not free. But for us not to take advantage of these record low interest rates on infrastructure right now is just wrong. And we may actually see this come back up. This could come back up this year. Here,
Yes, hi, my name is Victoria Guida. I'm a reporter with Inside U.S. Trade. I wanted to, first of all, congratulations on your new assignment on the Finance Committee. As I understand it, you're meeting with U.S. Trade Representative Michael Froman on Friday. And I was wondering...
It's funny, how you know that before I know. I know where I'm going the rest of the day today.
And I was just wondering, what your message was to him and whether you had any suggestions for the pending Trade Promotion Authority legislation.
Let me answer this. All my news before Friday. I think this. I think on a level playing field, America can and should compete against everybody in the world. And the idea of kind of going back to protected economies makes no sense. And I think the framework around TPP, my understanding, we need to see more of the details of it first, is that it is a different framework with higher environmental, labor, and other process standards than we've had perhaps with some of the other bilateral trade agreements in the past. And I also believe that in countries where we have trade agreements, we ship a lot more stuff. And the jobs that come in with those countries where we have trade agreements are a lot higher paying on the manufacturing side. And as America becomes more and more, because of our lowering cost of energy and because of rising cost of labor and elsewhere, we become a much better manufacturing center than we were even 7 or 8 years ago. So I think we need to do this in the fastest way possible. But I do think there needs to be some assurance around the framework of TPP. This is where I want to dig in before I give you the kind of straight answer that you're looking for. To get with more detail, to say, to be able to point out with more specificity how the frameworks of TPP is different than some of our past agreements. But I very much believe that net trade adds jobs. I have to tell you that is something that a lot of folks in Virginia don't believe. I go across Southside Virginia with textiles, tobacco, and furniture, and you have days you remember, and one of the saddest days I ever had, one of the days why I tried to still do this stuff, was when a company named Pelletex closed down overnight in Martinsville, Virginia, and put about 600 people out of work, just like this. And I was there, met with all the workers in training, and all these people would go down the lines of Colony, 20-something years, 30-something years, 15 years, 12 years. What are these people doing? And they wanted just a chance to work, or a chance for the kids to have choice. And now that people think that it is, all these jobs went to Mexico, they stopped in Mexico and went to China. With the increasing productivity, even wherever those jobs were now, there are a lot less people than they were there. And that's again one of the things why I think, particularly around trade issues, we need to do a much better job than we have bringing manufacturing and every jobs to rural communities. My best day as governor was when we brought from CGI 400 plus mid-scale tech jobs to Russell County and far southwest Virginia, and a whole bunch of folks said, my gosh, I can stay here. So trade is a piece of this that I intend to be a proponent for, but I want to make sure before we kind of lay out specifics, not only on TPP, but on fast track, that I get my further I'm going to do these three because they're giving me the hook.
Right.
These, and I'll answer briefly.
Okay. My name's Julie Carney. I'm with CEA, and that was my phone that was buzzing because you said we could keep our cell phones on.
Cha-ching, cha-ching.
We spend a lot of time looking at Capitol Hill, and I think some of the other folks that raised the issue, we think that maybe the job isn't being done or isn't being done in a way that we think it should be, and there's a lot of bipartisan bickering going on. But what is our responsibility as constituents to stay engaged and to help empower you to do your job? I think a lot of people just sort of tune it out and focus on their day-to-day. How do we re-engage?
I think it's a great question. Again, I don't have it. I go back to my kind of simplistic. Don't vote for somebody who signs a pledge of either party. Information age is great, but you don't have any screens anymore. Where's Walter Cronkite when we need him, for those of us who are old enough to remember? And I do think, and this gets me in trouble, I think some of my folks on the inside, is that if we want to reinforce elected officials to be more disruptive or not to be simply marching party lines, we have to help them. That means get out our personal flock cells. That means if you're a Republican, support a Democrat, I said this earlier, but support somebody that you wouldn't normally support if they're showing political courage. It is weird about people often ask me, being a business guy for long and a politician, what's the biggest difference? Politics is the only business around where you can have your whole career based upon simply saying bad things about the opposition, and that be a successful outcome. If Nextel all we did was were to say bad things about Verizon and never put out a quality product, they'd be out of business. So you've got to put out. It's a good question. Yes, sir. And then I'm going to get these last two, and then that's it.
Yeah. My name is Colin King from CEA.
Yes, sir.
And first of all, I want to thank you for answering this question today. I'm a frustrated current customer of Comcast. So my question is, with this recent, acquisition or potential acquisition with Time Warner or merger, how concerned as consumers should we be about this kind of merger? When I mean concerned, I mean like affordability of cable and internet, etc.
Well, I think it's a great question, and one I'm going to partially reserve judgment on until I do more due diligence. I do think on the, their argument on the cable piece, that Time Warner and Comcast have very different markets. I think not a lot of overlap. I understand the argument on cable, but I actually think this is as much a question about broadband, and we need active competition for broadband. We need to maintain the concepts around net neutrality. I think Wheeler's coming back on this in a different way than in the past. We have to also find a way, frankly, politics aren't in at that, but I also do need to say we need to have some pipe that allows enough revenues into these networks so they build it all out and continue to come back to how we get those underserved communities. So I'm less on the cable concern and more on the broadband. I think there are the Dish and some of the other video, and frankly, my kids, first they never watch TV, they watch everything on computers. So I'm more about the broadband competitive components. Good question. You got the last 2 words.
Oh, great. Thank you for taking our questions today. As a Virginia resident and CEA employee, I'm really glad you could make it out today. So another big topic at CES this year was the Internet of Things. I was wondering, as a federal regulator, how you felt about the widespread collection of this data and what that means for data security.
I'm on the Intel committee. I'd love to tell you, but I'd have to take you out of it. I think if the American public realized how many times a day all of our institutions were under cyber attack, they'd be very concerned. And I just held a hearing on the data breach around Target, and Marcus and Michaels and a variety of others, and I think there will be others coming. And there are small things we can do, such as I haven't fully realized this. You have totally different consumer protections on a debit card versus a credit card. That will be equalized. There needs to be, how do you make sure, I get the fact that we don't want big new regulatory entities in the technology space that aren't going to be nimble, but how in an industry do you make sure you don't have free riders in terms of not having price? How do you keep the standards and best practices nimble enough so that there is some penalty if you're not meeting those standards? I think on the questions of big data, we were at just the outset and trying to kind of literally and figuratively get your arms around all the implications of this are huge. Let me comment on one though. Here's a piece that is, and you guys will get this first of all, any of you I talk to, huge concerns and rightful concerns about NSA, Section 215, mass collection of not your content of your telephone call, but the phone number connectivity. And let me say at the outset, I do believe, and there's a lot of things in the bill that we've got in the Senate committee that adds, for example, I put an amendment in that says you need at the FISA court a amicus kind of representing the public and stronger protections. And if there's some other kind of overarching CBO type independent entity that kind of looks at this, there's areas that we can push. But and here's again a conundrum where the president has suggested that makes sense on one level, but may not on the other, because when we're thinking about if you start with a premise that there are legitimate intel and law enforcement reasons, and because we were talking about this on the intel side, nobody's really focused on the law enforcement side, that phone records which should be kept for some period of time, and if we think Gary's a bad guy and have gone to a court and approved that, and you want to go back and look and see who Gary's called, not his location, but who's called. If you accept that premise, which maybe you don't accept, but if you get to that point, then the question becomes: you're going to maintain this program in a slimmed down way. Where do you maintain it? The irony is that I would think most folks, and many on my committee, will say, we can't trust the NSA to hold this data. We want the data to be held at the telcos. The ironic part about that is, remember, you guys are getting it all. Where the data is held is simply where the servers are and what the name on the front of the building is. Is it an NSA name, or is it a Verizon name, or is it an AT&T name? And in the system where you actually hold it at the telcos, you actually run, which may give people the sense of, at least the government's not holding it, so I feel better. But it's going to, one, cost a lot more, and ironically, you're going to have a lot more people having access to your information than you do in the current system. So in the notion of having greater privacy protections, will actually, in reality, because, again, we've proven legitimately, let's say, that Gary's a potential bad guy.
Turn off that camera.
But then all of a sudden, instead of having a very small number of people being able to make that query on Gary's telephone number, you have it done in every one of the telcos. You've exponentially driven up the people who are potentially exposed. So hugely complex issues, and how we have a debate on these that doesn't get blown up or blown up in terms of scaring tactics on either side. Boy, this is an area where we need to be thoughtful and effective, and I am wanting to go along. You get the last word.
Okay, thank you so much. Laura Berry, and I work in membership here at CEA. Dallas Airport has recently become infamously known for having very, very long wait times to go through customs. And you recently spoke with the DHS regarding that, and I was hoping you could provide some headway.
Let the record show that I did not set up this question. But I'm also, I'm going to answer the question. But I'm also interested that, nobody asked about health care.
Consider that a gift.
Oh, no, it was a very imperfect bill with a disastrous rollout that needs to get fixed. But again, here's the mindset of someone else says, don't touch a word, repeal on all costs, kind of extremes when there's good in this. Usually people get health care that didn't get it before. I saw a lady the other day in Percival, they had juvenile diabetes, 52, and these are my daughter's got juvenile diabetes, saying, first time ever she went in to get a blood tested and a regular way. On the other hand, there needs to be plans, there needs to be much more business friendliness to it, there needs to not have cliff effects on 29 hours. I got a whole litany of things that I'm going to changes. I just want to make sure that it was not. But it also proves, again, why you need bipartisan, because history will show Congress never gets it right on the first time attack. And so you need that kind of bipartisan ownership to come back and fix. Medicare had to be fixed. On the very nice question you asked about that, it makes me crazy that you've passed through customs, there's 25 days, and 3 are open, and you have wait times over the holidays were up to 2 hours. Sometimes up to 4 hours. We have got companies that we located in Northern Virginia, international, or North American, at least headquarters of international brand name companies, because of the access to Dulles. If you had 2 hours on top of a 9 or 10 hour flight, you are not going to be a happy camper. So, and Homeland Security and Customs and Border Protection got a lot more money in the budget. So I want to know 3 things. 1, why aren't you staffing these in a more accurate way? 2, show me the metrics on how well these people who are processing process. You got to have some data on that. And 3, you ought to go ahead and work closer with the airports authority on scheduling. Why do we have to schedule all the international flights to arrive at the same time? So, this is something that I think I hope to come back with something and say, gosh, we got something done. Close with this. Thank you, Gary. Thank CEA, my telecom friend, others, Jay, for being here. This is great for me to learn. I would simply close with this: is that there are times. This goes back to your question. How do you stay up and engaged? There are moments when I get really frustrated in this job. The job I've ever had. The moments when I get most frustrated, I always remember that great Winston Churchill quote. It was early in World War II, and the Nazis had conquered all of Europe. There's a question what the United States would do or not do, and Churchill was only he could do kind of went to rally the British people. He said, "You can always count on the Americans to do the right thing after they've tried everything else. Then if you like to wear out our hearts, you're gonna do the right thing.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Warner, you've been to CES twice. We hope to see you back there in January as Senator Warner. And you can know now why that there's a tech person in Congress. He gets the issues. You're way too substantive, and definitely from our industry. But we really appreciate you taking the time. We appreciate what you do for Virginia, and we're always here for you. Thank you, Senator. Thank you very much.